Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, has the gang rape tragedy in New Delhi sparked a social revolution in India? Is this the tipping point that forces the country to address violence against women? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Tweet her using the hashtag AJStream. Malika, this horrific gang rape story in New Delhi has really captured the attention of so many around the world. And I know our community's been very active on this since it happened. What are we seeing today?
Definitely. Well, a lot of people are saying all of the outrage that we've seen after this, will this turn into something concrete? And why is it only now that that might happen?
Yeah.
Oluwatoyin on Twitter kind of sums it up. He says, to think that a young woman with a promising future had to die for concrete action to be taken is, to say the least, appalling. But of course, we want to hear from all of you at home. So whether you are in India or elsewhere, join the conversation using the hashtag AJStream.
To Malika's right is Mitch Recoleta, a journalist who has reported for the Washington Post, Newsday, and the Associated Press. She is also the author of My Two Indias, A Journey to the Ends of Opportunity. Mitra, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Today we are also joined by a number of bloggers and activists who are on the ground in New Delhi, among other places. They are in our Google Plus Hangout. We're going to be getting to their comments and questions very shortly. But for those of you who want to join future Hangouts, be sure to go to the link on your screen and just add us to your circles.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I teach Latin and Ancient Greek to the coolest high school students ever, and I'm in the stream.
As the ashes of the New Delhi gang rape victim were scattered on the banks of the Ganges River, Indians across the country remain horrified by the deadly assault against the 23-year-old medical student, whose identity is not being released. Men and women alike have steadily poured into the streets of major cities, calling for tougher laws and better security in a country where a woman is estimated to be raped every 20 minutes. Rape cases in India have been rising at an alarming rate for the past 6 decades. The National Crime Records Bureau says reported cases of rape increased by 873% since the early 1950s. The question that everyone is asking is why? Why has New Delhi emerged as the rape capital of India, accounting for a quarter of all reported cases? And why is it that 78% of New Delhi women claimed they were sexually harassed at least once in 2012? That's according to a recent Hindustan Times survey. Although the government has promised to come up with a series of measures to reduce violence against women, many Indians remain skeptical, saying authorities have done little in the past to address this situation. So, will this incident bring change? And is this the tipping point that forces India to address violence against women? In just a few minutes to help us answer these questions, we're going to be joined via Skype from New Delhi by Nilanjana Roy. She's a columnist at the Business Standard. She's written for the International Herald Tribune and the Kolkata Telegraph on gender issues in India. So until we get Nilanjana Roy, Mitra, I want to start with you. We're talking about a country where rape happens every 20 minutes. Where some would argue that this is just part of the history, violence against women. It's just the way things are. What is it about this situation and about this crime that's made people sit up and take notice? What's different about it?
So there's a few factors that I think gave a lot of the Indian middle class instant recognition in this woman. She had just gone to the movies and seen The Life of Pi. Mm-hmm. She was with a male friend. And they were just trying to get home on a Sunday night. It was 9:30. It was not 1 in the morning. It was not 2 in the morning. She was not outside a nightclub or a discotheque or many other incidents that have occurred, even within the last few months of sexual assault and molestation within India, where fingers were actually pointed at the victim because of where they were and what they were wearing, which we can come back to,
Sure.
and the fairness of that. But she was doing something that, by all accounts of middle-class India, was normal and recognizable to them. And I think that's really what struck a nerve, is that she could have been one of us, our sister, our cousin, a coworker. And there's something about the middle-class Indian reaction here that's striking. Social media would form a big part of that, right? People who would be on Twitter and Facebook and talking about this,
right,
versus the other India, which experiences a lot of the same brutality every 20 minutes. There's even been outrage over Delhi being the rape capital of the world, because many people are saying, well, actually, the rape capital of India is rural India, where most of India lives, these villages where nobody pays attention.
And nothing is reported.
And nothing is
probably, right?
reported, and there's no outrage. And this is kind of coming to a head, and you're having that India as well as the middle class India united. And the other point that I think is worth mention is that these protests are not over rape alone. When this woman died on Saturday, I think just collectively, I mean, I'm like getting chills as I even think about it now, because there is not, 78% of women, I guess, reported that they had been harassed alone in Delhi. There is not a woman who's ridden a city bus in India and not been groped. We've all been through that. It's such a common occurrence that I think this is such a brutal, egregious example of what, it took this to sort of examine the day-to-day of being a woman in India. And I think that's a lot of the outrage that you're seeing.
Nilanjana Roy joining us now from India. Nilanjana, why does this continue to happen? What is it that makes women feel safe on public transportation, or makes them feel like they can't go out at night by themselves after dark?
There are so many answers to this. There's the patriarchal mindset, there's the old argument about two cultures clashing, an old conservative traditional society versus a modernizing society that, as Mitra says, is rapidly modernizing, with too much speed for people to change. But part of the problem, and this has been foregrounded through these last two incredibly emotional weeks, is simply that we hadn't taken sexual violence against women seriously. Part of the picture is that for women, life is very complex out here. You have rising literacy rates. You have much more mobility across classes. This isn't just for the upper middle class or for the middle classes, but you have many more women going out to work and much more of an attempt to claim freedoms. But when I look at it, I see that over the last 20 or 25 years at least, Delhi and North India haven't actually changed very much. There are parts of India where you might feel safer as a woman, or you might feel less constantly threatened. Here it's almost as though there's a need to remind women whenever they step out into public space. It seems as though the very act of stepping out is seen as a transgression by some men. I have to clarify that this isn't by all men, but it's definitely still part of the culture of the city. Again, as you're pointing out, when you're looking at rape in India, you're looking at several kinds of rape. We're talking at this point of time, the country's attention is focused on one kind, which is this sort of brutal rape by a bunch of strangers. We haven't yet opened up a dialogue on marital rape, which is not even recognized by the law. We haven't started talking in enough detail about the many instances of custodial rape or the rape of women by the military and police. So there's this entire conversation that for the last 3 or 4 years has been on the boil. It's been happening privately, and it seems to have become visible through this tragic incident.
And in addition to rape, many of our community members are talking to us about these day-to-day injustices. Aman Wajud on Twitter says, although the Delhi gang rape protest is historic, many women complained about molestations while protesting. It says all about the mindset. I want to talk to one of those women, Shambhavi, who's in our Google Plus Hangout, speaking to us from Delhi. Shambhavi, you say that you were roughed up at a protest by police. Tell us what happened to you.
So I went for a protest to Jantar Mantar on the 25th of December, and I had gone there to basically demand the safety of women and women's rights and stuff. And the most ironic thing was that while I was protesting, I got to see this completely brutal side of the police. These are supposed to be our protectors, and what happened was we had heard that they were dragging off women protesters and detaining them at a police station. So we went voluntarily to ask for their release, and in the process, the police started beating us up as well. And that was just completely shocking, because what is the point of asking for women's safety when the police don't keep you safe, when every woman in the city would rather just go home than approach the police for help? So I think it's a huge problem that we need to address, not only in Delhi, but all over the nation.
Mitra, why don't you pick up on that? The attitudes of of police in these cases?
So the irony is that one of the initial responses by the government was, we will increase police presence, we will have more buses at night and that sort of thing. But the security and police presence is something that was promised, I believe, about 10 days back, before the young woman died and while the protests were still waging. And the irony among so many women was, the part of the problem here is the judicial system in India. So part of the problem here are actually the police. And I don't think this government yet has fully addressed that issue of people not feeling safe by the people who are supposed to be keeping them safe. And that's actually been a thread we're seeing in the last few protests that we've seen, I'd say over the last 3 years in India, beginning with the Mumbai terrorist attacks, where you've had the middle class really mobilizing. Security is an ongoing theme and concern, whether it's gender related or not. And I think that it's kind of the elephant in the room here, where it's not being addressed head on, and yet until that is talked about, and corruption, as well as kind of these attitudes among security forces are dealt with, there is not going to be change. There are some attempts, and I actually visited about 10 years ago a female police station in Chennai, a city in the south. And the thinking there was, let's make this a kind of women-friendly place where women can report injustices towards them. And it's a great concept, but even the attitudes in a female police station, at least from what I observed, are kind of a more conciliatory type of feminism that I don't think the modern Indian woman is willing to tolerate anymore. So Nilanjana mentioned just the idea of going outside as a transgression. I sat next to a couple that were filing a complaint with a police officer about some abuse from a woman's mother-in-law, and the answer there was to make sure that she returned to the home, right, to kind of save face in the society. So you have a lot of fundamental issues here that just adding a few cops on New Delhi streets at 9 o'clock at night, that might be part of the problem.
Our community is jumping in with solutions from the extreme to the not so. Lois on Twitter says they should pass a law that allows castration of perpetrators. And Anam says we need to reform the legal and justice system. Rapists and harassers have to fear the repercussions for committing these horrid crimes. And with that, I want to go to Google Plus Hangout to talk to Shehla, who is speaking to us from New Delhi. Shehla, go ahead.
Well, we believe that very small measures can go a long way in addressing the problem of rape. Delhi, Haryana, and neighboring states. These are not just the top states in rapes or violence against women. These are number 5 and number 9 on crime, crime in general as well. So, very simple steps to address crime. For example, using CCTV cameras in an overt manner, that can help. Or increasing surveillance, having helpline numbers. For example, some of the helpline numbers, we detected that they don't work from all the networks. So what is the point of having helpline numbers when they are not properly publicized, when you cannot reach them from all networks? And then the police numbers on the website of Delhi Police, the numbers of all the officers, they are wrong. None of them works. So is this the protection that the police claims to give to women? And when I actually spoke to Ms. Sheila Dikshit, who is the Chief Minister of Delhi this summer, she dismissed it as a problem of immigrants. But I don't think that that's right, because in the Delhi bus gang rape incident, the offenders were from all parts of the country, and they were arrested from all parts of the country.
You know, I think a lot of people would agree that the government could do more, and this is a big issue right now, the government's attitude toward women. I mean, the Indian president's son, who is also a Congress member of Parliament, he was quoted as saying, "Those who claim to be students, I can see many beautiful women among them. They were highly dented and painted. They're giving interviews on TV. They've brought their children to show them the scenes." His remarks on Christmas fueled the anger of protesters. He actually then appeared on a talk show that's called The News Hour, where he was asked to clarify those remarks that he made. Take a listen.
What are dented and painted women? Who are dented and painted women? The question is in the public domain. You will have to explain what you meant by dented and painted women. Since you did say those words, you will have to explain. You can't brush it aside.
I have withdrawn that statement. I have tendered apology.
And now he's apologized repeatedly, and the news anchor did continue to press this point with him during the interview. But Rajashree, I want to direct this to you. Is this the kind of attitude that's played a role in the struggles of women in India? I mean, we look at politicians, right? There are politicians in office right now with active cases of rape and sexual harassment against them.
Hi, yeah, that's exactly my point, that while we have all this outrage against, cultural icons and so on, the question we need to ask is from our politicians that till they expel candidates who they have given tickets to, who have records of crimes against women. And I'm not just talking about rape, I'm talking about violence against women. And the numbers are quite horrific. There are 6 sitting MLAs have declared rape cases against them. There are 36 MLAs have charges of crime against women. So it's a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of lip service right now, which is happening, that, oh, we really want to stop crimes against women. But the point is that till the politicians show that they mean business themselves by expelling candidates from their own parties, nobody is going to take them seriously.
Mm-hmm. Our community is agreeing with that. Cynthia says, I think the problem is that people are still blaming the women for dressing, for the way they dress and et cetera, being raped. This attitude is outdated and wrong. Nilanjan, I want to direct this next one to you. Aman says the protests against the gang rape can force the government to amend the laws, but it won't change the mindset of the people. Rapes will continue. Can you talk to us about changing the mindset and what will that take?
Well, there's 2 parts to it. One, as we've seen and as everyone's been talking about, is the need for deep systemic reform, not just passing a few laws here and there. But when you bring up the police, for example, the police, the way that they react to women, discouraging them from reporting rape, occasionally making threats, often blaming the woman for being raped. The Delhi police attitude to women was frequently, she must have asked for it, or she was wearing something provocative. And effectively, they're reflecting the general mindset just as much as the politicians are. But the idea that this cannot change, I think, needs to be challenged. One of the things that I saw when I was out on December 22nd, on the first day of the protests, there was a crowd of about 8,000 to 10,000 students from all across the national capital region. And a lot of them wanted change. A lot of them were saying explicitly that they did not want to buy into either the rape culture or to the older culture that says you must protect women, you must work for their safety. They said, no, we don't want safety, we don't want protection, we really want freedom. If you're talking about a change in mindset, I think if you go back to, I can't stop thinking about that young girl, but one of the things that came out of the Delhi gang rape was also the story of her family. That family comes from a fairly conservative part of Haryana, and yet they weren't economically well off. But they were part of another mainstream Indian story, which is that they worked very hard to send their daughter to school, to help her get an education, and they completely supported her quest to work. One of the reasons why she was working towards a physiotherapy degree before she was killed so brutally was also because her father and her mother made sacrifices in order to support her career. And so it mustn't be forgotten, I think, at this time particularly, that while the violence is more apparent, I think there are a lot of families that are buying out, that are no longer buying into this. One of the most interesting stories I was following recently was something to do with the village councils in Haryana, which wield a great deal of power and influence. They're also known for their anti-women pronouncements. In the past, they've asked for a ban on mobile phones, on women using them, specifically young men and women. They've asked for women's freedom to be curtailed. A couple of the village councils have actually indicated that they support honor killings, for example.
Nilanjan, I want to jump in here. Mitra, something that Nilanjan is talking about is not just systemic reform, but what's going on in the culture and the cultural norms. And a lot of folks on Twitter have been bringing up Bollywood and pointing the finger in that direction. We're going to show some clips here from some of the movies. Some are overt, some are not, but there are plenty of rape scenes that come up in these Bollywood films. What influence does that broadly have on people's mindsets?
Bollywood is a huge influencer on people's attitudes. It's also a huge reflection of their aspirations and their attitudes. So it's kind of a two-way street here. There was a piece I saw recently about someone who had been on the censor board. Bollywood movies are heavily censored, and he actually said that about 50% of the scenes that are censored are actually of kind of thrusting before a woman by like multiple men. So it's kind of a scene that somehow people have just become sensitized to, which is quite shocking.
And it's even more pervasive. It seems that the scenes that we just showed were very obvious and very overt.
And there were
but there are some very subtle scenes too that happen in a lot of the Bollywood films. I mean, the men
so
wooing
now we're getting
the women,
to more modern movies,
right? but the premise is they keep pursuing. The women keep saying no. The guys keep pursuing, and eventually, the women relent. Right. So what message does that send? That sends this message that the persistent guy, the aggressive guy, gets the girl. Does that influence?
It does influence, but I would argue that Hollywood has many of those same messages, that a lot of the cinema industry around the world is sexist. And so I don't think we can blame Bollywood alone. I think that there are more attitudes in the Indian family that are passed on in the way that mothers raise their sons and fathers raise their sons.
Good point.
That don't keep up with the reality of India now. So, Bollywood is kind of an easy target. I don't give Bollywood a pass. I cringe when I see a lot of this, and I think a lot of people globally are watching Bollywood movies in the aftermath of this rape and thinking twice about what they're seeing.
Maybe it means more now.
Right.
And maybe that's a good thing.
That's right.
Raheel, we want to get you in here. Talk about the role of men in India right now and why it is so critical that men are speaking out. Need you unmute your mic.
Well, I went to the protests at India Gate on Sunday and then to the Jawaharlal Nehru University on the New Year Eve, and it was heartening to see the number of men out on the streets. One could draw two inferences from the fact that the men were out in large numbers. One is that the women still fear being groped, but another inference, and a positive one if one may, is that this fight is fundamentally not just about women's rights. It's transformed itself into a fight for gender rights. It's transformed itself into a fight for human rights, rather. So the conversation that has moved from the fight being about just women's rights, the fight being about, these women need, we need to be out to ensure that these women need these rights, to being, we need to make sure that as a society there is enough push on the government to make sure that laws are passed, that ordinances in place, and that laws, policing is fixed, so that in general India becomes a safer place for women. I mean, the fact that this crime could happen in one of the best police districts in the country, as the details came out, is what angered the people. The anger on the streets was about a system that has time and again failed to deliver. And people were out on the streets asking for justice. And by that, I think the larger message being sent out was, it's now or never. I mean, an India of 2012 cannot be governed by a polity and an executive that is stuck in the 1950s and the 1960s. And to that extent, I think that's what the larger message of the protesters, men and women, was when it came to what you saw unraveling in New Delhi over the last couple of weeks.
And of course that raises the question, what is the mechanism for change? And that's something that we want to get into in our post show, which is coming up next. So thank you to all of our guests today. If you're near a computer, log on to stream.aljazeera.com for the rest of our discussion. Now on Thursday, a conversation with best-selling author Nassim Taleb. We're going to talk to him about his new book and why socioeconomic systems should embrace chaos and disorder. Until then, we'll see you online. Welcome back to the Online Post Show. We're going to pick up where we left off. We're asking about what the mechanism of change is going to be in India to sort of shift what many have called a culture of violence against women. Now, Lanjana, I want to pick up with you. With whom does this begin? Is it government and police? Is it these grassroots level uprisings and protests? How does this move forward in a meaningful way?
I don't think it's going to be up to the government and the legal system, much as we hope that they will reform. But the way this is going to move, I suspect, is if it starts moving from the metros to the small towns to some extent. The one thing that has shifted completely at this point is that we can no longer ignore the cost of sexual violence and sexual harassment. And I sense that women and young men, to a large extent, really, really want this to shift. You might not see that much in the way of massive marches and protests in that sense. But I think that you're going to see a lot of calls for personal change and a lot less tolerance of a certain kind of embedded sexism, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. One of the things that happened in recent weeks and in the past year is that finally it started shifting from the knee-jerk blaming of women. She shouldn't have been out, she shouldn't have been doing this, she shouldn't have been doing that, to actually trying to look a little bit at the problem of masculine violence, for example, and embedded in that again, how that affects men. I think it's going to have to come from the family at some level. I also think it's going to have to come from religion, which is the one institution that's actually been silent during this entire debate.
Well, Nisha here on Twitter has thoughts on this breakdown of law. She says there's a breakdown of law and order being enforced, and the protests are a result of a frustration of this helplessness. And there's a video comment here. Have a listen.
Hi, this is Alok Parna calling from India. I think the public outrage is completely justified, and it's about time that the public came out in such strong numbers to demand for better laws and better treatment and better security of women. But this does not limit itself to only security and law, because women have to be treated equally and women have to take that right for themselves. And unless that is done, nothing is going to change in India.
Mitra, good point Alok makes, taking the right for themselves. But give us a historical perspective. What happens when women try to take a stand like that in India?
Well, there's great stigma attached to it, and you're sort of labeled. I mean, this is why, I mean, you can take the same Bollywood movie sort of desire for a woman to get married, and culturally how important it is that she remains pure, not just in the sexual sense, but also has she ever had boyfriends? Has she ever spoken up? Is she sort of known for there's a propriety that's expected, and I think there's some danger, especially as Nilanjana mentions, if this pervades to the smaller towns. I'm from a region in the Northeast where women are known actually for being fairly strong. One of our communities is actually matriarchal, and nonetheless, I just keep thinking about those city buses and when you're on them. So, your last video comment and women taking a stand for themselves, I wonder now if something happens on a bus, is there a signal or is there something that we can collectively do so that there's attention on this everyday injustice that's occurring? That might be one way, just to not have to tolerate it anymore.
Sure, and now would be the time to capitalize on
Right.
strength in numbers,
Right.
considering how many women are already out protesting in droves.
Shahid, I know you had a follow-up comment. Go ahead.
Actually, ensuring women's safety is no rocket science, because let's say we bring in all these problems, cultural problem, etc., etc. But let's say if the same guys, the guys who did this Delhi gang rape incident, who were involved in it, let's say they are sent to Singapore or Saudi Arabia, they know there's a simple fact that the law is very strong and the law will get to them. So they won't do the same thing there. So it's no rocket science. The conviction rates in India are as low as 26%. Rapists do not get convicted, and investigation standards are very low because the cops themselves believe that rapes are just consensual sex gone wrong. And the judges, according to a 1996 survey, They believe that dress is the major cause for rape, but what about children who get raped? And then there is this whole question of death penalty. The president has actually commuted the death sentences of various child rapists and murderers. So there's no fear of law, basically. That's the point I'm making.
Well, Raheel, our community is also reminding us, of course, that this happens lots of places. This is not just in India. Never Forget says it's not just India. Unless gender inequality is significantly reduced across the globe, the violence will continue. And another from Anam who says, this reminds me of the woman in the blue bra who was dragged in the streets during protests in Cairo, Egypt, not too long ago. This is a global phenomenon. But I want to know how we're going to change this into concrete action, because that's something our community is still asking us. Motithal says the dedicated call center set up to handle violence against women are completely managed by men. Now, Raheel, I know that you, of course, are the communications director for change.org. You're using online means to make a change. Are you seeing anything come out of that?
Yes, we've had hundreds of young people, thousands of young people, in fact, rally around this cause, and we just submitted, the government has set up a commission, a committee, Justice Verma committee, to which we just, other day, in fact, Lanjana was a part of the submission. We submitted about 125,000 signatures. That petition is at about 150,000 signatures, touching nearly 150,000 signatures now. Similarly, there's another charter for demand that's doing the rounds. The fact is that the online space has gone a long way in giving this protests on the street a direction in terms of what the demands are, what the actionable items are. They have given the streets, the protests on the streets, a very solid focus in terms of breakdown of points, in terms of the fast tracking of these cases in courts, in special courts, in terms of making sure that security is improved, in terms of making sure just basic measures like lighting on the streets, those kinds of demands are immediately met. And we've seen that along with the protests that sort of rocked the country, a lot of online action on our platform, on several other platforms, on Twitter, has made sure that the voices of these protesters, that the voices of people online and offline can't be ignored, because the demands are focused, concentrated, and there are hundreds and thousands of people putting their force behind, putting their weight behind these demands and asking the government to act, and sending thousands of emails literally to the Prime Minister's office, to the President's office, and to the powers that be, making sure that these demands are met.
Mitra, change never happens quickly, but what signs are you going to look for as this moves forward, as the media attention fades, that would tell you change is really happening? These thoughts are shifting, ideas are starting to stick. What are you going to look for as benchmarks?
So I'm not optimistic on one front, because the reality is that the middle class in India does not vote. People who tweet are not the ones who form kind of the rural vote banks that many of these politicians are after. So sweeping change of the government and kind of the folks in authority here, I don't see as largely imminent. The part that I am optimistic about is the attitude change. And that's what I think we need to keep an eye on. And there's two lenses here. One is
15 seconds.
Internal, just that the way that mothers are raising their sons is becoming actually an issue in a lot of these protests. So I think the messaging that's going on there. And the other is the global focus on India right now. India is in the spotlight for the wrong reasons, and it cannot afford that. And I really hope that people see the economic miracle that has become India is largely on the backs of women who have powered that, and that they can also do something about this.
Mitra, thank you for being here today. Mitch Recoleta, Nilanjana Roy, and to all of our guests in Google Hangout, thanks for joining us. Now on Thursday, a conversation with best-selling author Nassim Nicholas Taleb. We're going to talk to him about his new book, about why socioeconomic systems should embrace chaos and disorder. Until then, we'll see you online.